Welcome back to another episode of On the Line. Today, joining me is Moureen Kaki. She has been in Gaza for the past year and a half and is head of GLIA International's mission there. She was also part of the reception team that was receiving Palestinian hostages that have been freed from Israeli prisons. You don't want to miss this interview. She gives testimonies from the hostages, and some of the stories are very disturbing. Some of the torture that they have endured while being in those prisons. As always, we ask that you support the work we do. We cannot do this work without you. We are completely reader and viewer funded, and we want to remain that way. Please head on over to patreon.com/onthelinemedia. Show us some love. Make sure that we can continue to bring you the people that you most need to hear from now. That's patreon.com/onthelinemedia. Coming up is my interview with head of GLIA International's mission in Gaza, Moureen Kaki. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me on the line. We're seeing these images of Palestinian hostages being released back into Gaza. You were part of the reception team that was receiving some of these Palestinian hostages from Israeli prisons. What were they telling you?
One of the things that really struck me is that there was actually a really common story and experience shared by the overwhelming majority of the folks that I talked to yesterday. And the most, like, I can't even decide what the most egregious is, because they were all just talking about horrific stories of torture, just beatings and beatings in places where they had like intentionally had surgery or noted previous injuries to Israelis as they were doing like medical evaluations, who took it upon themselves to just use those to exacerbate people's pain. There were, sort of soft forms of torture where people talked about being forced to kneel or sit in very uncomfortable positions for hours on end. And then there was almost every single patient I talked to brought up the fact that aside from the horrific conditions that they'd been experiencing, ranging months to years in Israeli prisons, the last 3 days, ever since the ceasefire was announced, they all reported that they were only allowed toilet water to drink. And they were not allowed any food for the past 3 days since the announcement of the ceasefire. And even before that, food was really scarce. A meal consisted of 3 spoons of something, is how they described it. More than one person used that phrase to describe it. It was 3 spoons of lentils or chickpeas or rice. Just really horrific stories of Israelis pulling out their fingernails, sticking needles under their fingernails. Those were some of the like really, really particularly tough stories to listen to. I don't even know where to begin. There were at least 3 captives who were released that had gunshot wounds within the past 3 weeks. These were open wounds that were still healing. And they were fairly large, and they were all in the leg.
And so how are you when they would come in to see, I'm assuming you were in Nasser Medical Complex.
Correct. Yeah.
What were the doctors doing?
The doctors were doing medical examinations. They were doing, it was basically taking like a brief history and doing medical examinations, determining who was required to send to the emergency room for immediate care, which there were a few of those folks. And then sort of trying to get a brief medical history from the rest of the folks to determine like what kind of care they would need. And that was really hard, right? Because people were complaining, for example, of being beat in the head or on the ear, specifically around the ear, and having symptoms that were associated with that for months. And then they come here and the doctor writes them a referral to an ENT, and it's like, okay, you need an ENT, and ENTs are present, but hospitals are destroyed, and there's still not the supplies available to like treat people sufficiently. So what are I mean, they're basically giving instructions for follow-up care that is just inaccessible here because of what the Israelis have done.
What's an ENT? What is that?
Sorry, an ear, nose, and throat doctor.
Oh, ear, nose, and throat. Okay.
Yeah, or like a
And what is that
neurologist, right?
what is that beeping I'm hearing?
That beeping that you're actually hearing, so because the Israelis have like only basically left Gaza relying on solar power, and even it's if you're using solar power, you are really really lucky. And so in our guest house here at Glia in Dil Balah, we have a solar panel system that is the only means of our power, and that beeping is an indicator that our battery is below 50%. Which is what we rely on at night because there's no sun. So the batteries, yeah, store the power at night. Um,
There is this real. I think a lot of people don't quite understand that you are basically trying to do this work while under an absolute siege. So that directive that Yoav Galant gave of no food, no water, no fuel, no electricity, is still on. That hasn't changed.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, no, it hasn't changed. I mean, I don't think people can fathom um, living daily life and what that looks like, right? It means that you're waiting with like, if you can find storage gallon tanks for your water, you're lucky if you're a family of six that you have two of these storage gallon tanks, that you're waiting for the water truck to come to your camp every morning, and you send your youngest kid to fill that up because that's an easy task, while everybody else is like looking for plastics and any kind of fuel to burn to make a fire, to heat water for a shower, to bathe their baby, because you can't do that in cold water, to cook food, to make a cup of tea if they have tea, if they can afford it. And that's not even considering the fact that for the longest time, for example, yes, aid and commercial good have been getting in at a higher rate, but shelter materials, so tents and tarps and these kinds of basic things, especially as winter is approaching, have still been very, very much like banned. I mean, de facto banned by the Israelis.
Mm,
Only an
tents. I
extremely
remember
small
tents was on
number.
the list. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, only an extremely small number of tents have been let in since March. And the amount of people that have been displaced left and right, and 90% of people have been displaced and their homes have been destroyed, and they're living in makeshift shelters. So, I mean, it's just, yeah, people can't fathom what it's like to people are like, how do people spend their day? And I'm like, literally just trying to survive. That's it.
Maureen, I want to come back to the Palestinian hostages that were released. There are a lot of doctors, nurse practitioners, others who were also taken hostage. What have you heard about any of them being released?
There were a few that were released yesterday. Yeah, in yesterday's release. It's still unclear how many folks were released. I don't think it was the number agreed upon, that 2,000 number. And so I know that there were some healthcare workers who were kidnapped that have been released as of yesterday, and I mean, they faced the same experiences that everyone else did in prison. There was no differentiation. There was no mercy for them. Yeah.
What will you be doing? I mean, what is GLIA doing right now in terms of trying? Because I don't think medical supplies are coming in either at the same time as tents and other things aren't coming in. So what state is the Nasser medical complex in right now?
It is, on one hand, I want to give you the like the true picture, which is that it is a barely alive hospital, right? I mean, it is being held together by a thread, and that thread is the Palestinian physicians who are so committed to their patients and to their people that they find a way to make things happen in what should be considered near impossible circumstances. That's the only reason that health systems are still running, is because Palestinian staff and medical workers have been committed to finding a way to make things happen. But there in the hallways there are stacked with machines that are just no longer working, either because the Israelis when they done ground invasions, directly destroyed them, or as machines break, they just break, and the Israelis don't let in the spare parts. And so yeah, there's still not. Like yesterday, for example, scabies is such a common thing in Israeli prisons for Palestinians that the Ministry of Health had prepared care packages, and in those care packages, they included for sure out of all sort of medications and stuff, they included a pack of vitamins and they included scabies cream because that's how prevalent they knew it was. There was not enough scabies cream to pass out to all the captives that were released yesterday. And I mean, you're still dealing with insanely limited resources. Like hospitals are regularly running out of gloves. They may not have soap at any given moment to wash. They don't have antiseptic to clean the floor in the hospitals, so they're like scrubbing with soap, but it's not antiseptic. It's not the standard that we would expect anywhere else in the world, right? And this is beyond the stuff like not having the proper anesthetics
Oh
to
God.
do surgery on patients the way that you would anywhere else in the world. Um, yeah, there's a lack of crutches. So, a released hostage who came in yesterday, who was an amputee, just said, "Do you guys have any like crutches that I can have?" And I had to tell him, "No, I'm sorry. Like, there's just no crutches available."
So
Um,
Israel has been abducting amputees,
oh
like
yeah,
as part of its.
yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, because these were people like the way that people described their story. Like when I felt that there was somebody who was more willing to engage in conversation, I would ask them, can you tell me where you were when you were taken? Can you tell me anything about the day you were taken? And some of them described him as, oh, 1 minute we're getting hit with some kind of Israeli fire, and the next thing I know, I'm being taken, and in the process of me being taken, my family, one person described specifically that their family was being split by gender, and the women were being beat a certain way and the men were being beat a certain way, and he couldn't do anything about it and because he was being taken.
I remember
And
the
yeah,
images actually of the people who were abducted from Al Shifa, and they had lined them all up, and some of them were still tied to IV machines. That's the level of just absurd cruelty
yeah,
that we've
yeah.
been witnessing. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to impress upon?
I don't think so. If this were like NBC or some shit news show, I would talk about accountability and like justice and stuff. But I think your audience already knows that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Which is namely that, right, like the ceasefire is the beginning to this, but
Oh,
even
there
if it
is something I
was,
wanted to ask you,
oh
though,
yeah, shoot,
actually.
yeah, go for it.
So it was actually right before I got on to do this interview with you. I watched Christian Amanpour give an apology on CNN for saying that the Israeli hostages were treated better than the Palestinian hostages were. And she had to come back on the air and apologize for saying that. She said it was insensitive and wrong. What do you think about that?
I, you know, uh, I mean, it's just, I can't fathom. I mean, put aside how you feel about the situation in general. Palestinians treated the captives and lived in the captives that they had in the same conditions that were available to them. So they ate the things that Palestinians ate. If they were starved, it wasn't because Palestinians were starving them. It's because Israel had a blockade that was starving everybody. If they were killed, the overwhelming majority were killed by their own country's fire, right? So it's not like this juxtaposed to Palestinians who are in Israeli jails where there is a wealth of resources and they're being forced to drink toilet water and they're beating them in on surgical sites and shooting them in the leg 3 weeks before and just withholding food for no reason and forcing them to kneel in a way like all of these things just kind of speak to a level of cruelty and depravity on the side of Israelis that there's no evidence of in Palestinians. So I think it's just kind of crap that she would have to go back on the air and apologize. But I also think that speaks to the state of like how Zionism is so deeply embedded in mainstream media.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this whole idea that you can never really show the power imbalance that exists.
Right.
It comes down to this depraved idea that there is some sort of balance going on here in the both sidesism that we see in the
Right.
media, which is, in my opinion, really aided Israel in this genocide. I really want to thank you for joining me today. I give you all the power that you need to continue what you're doing on the ground.
I really appreciate you having me on the show today. Thanks so much.